What happens when a child is taught that the highest achievement in life is to die? Imagine learning the alphabet not through A for apple or B for book, but through a different vocabulary. A for Ahmad, J for jihad, and G for gun. This was Maiwand Banayee's childhood in a refugee camp in Pakistan, surrounded by stories of jihad and martyrdom. He gradually came to believe that he was ready to die for the cause. Today, Maiwand lives in the UK, works as a physiotherapist, and is the author of The Delusions of Paradise. His journey from wanting to die for an ideology to dedicating his life to healing raises a profound question. How does a child become radicalized, and what makes him eventually question everything he once believed? Today on the Peace Builders podcast, we hear that extraordinary journey from Maiwand himself. Welcome to the podcast, Maiwand.
Thank you so much, Ali, for having me in your program, and it's my pleasure to be talking to you.
Thank you. Take us back to your childhood. What do you remember about Afghanistan before your family left to Pakistan? What did the war look like through the eyes of a child?
Yeah, thanks so much, Ali. Basically, I was born in an impoverished neighborhood in Kurisangi, Kabul, into a Pashtun family. I was about 12 years of age when the Soviet-backed government, collapsed and the Mujahideen took over. And then the Mujahideen turned their guns on each other. A severe kind of civil war erupted. I mean, like the horror that I witnessed during that civil war, no child should ever have to kind of witness it again. So every moment is a moment of fear. The rockets hits the next door houses, it pelled debris and dust into your house and shatter the floor. And then you're thinking the next rocket will fall on your head there. There is also hunger. I've seen, dead bodies, I've seen, dog, eating humans' bodies. I've seen kids, being torn apart in front of me. So it was just a horrible thing, I mean, as I said, I've seen the best and the worst of humanity during that war. And then I was 14, that I migrated with my family, to refugee camps at the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And and then we settled in a mad refugee camp known as Shamshatu refugee camp. So this was one of the 150 refugee camps that had been built, for like 3 million Afghan refugees that had fled war. So by then, the Russian had been defeated, but the people living in those refugee camps were still drunk with that euphoria of Afghan jihad. They were seeing a divine hand in that their victory. So I sometimes tell people, as much as the structures of those mad refugee camps were anchored to 7th century Saudi Arabia, so were the mentality of the people and thoughts of people. So everything was really biblical and I mean ancient, and everyone had a story to tell, a tragedy to share. Those refugee camps were really conservative. They were basically state within the state and were extremely rife, for extremism, ripe for extremism. And I mean, religiosity was infused into every fabrics of people life there. And then I was really influenced by that culture. And then I got admission into a madrasa. Madrasa means religious seminary. In that refugee camp. Basically, once you get admission into madrasa, you're just walking into an ideological echo chambers of the past. You live with the bygone stories of, Prophet Muhammad's companion and how bravely they fought against the Jews and Christians and infidels. And they would just kind of lionize the martyred and glorify their afterlife with absolute comfort. I was taught that apostates should be killed and Sharia should dominate, and it was every Muslim's obligation in order, to strive for bringing about, Sharia, God's laws on God's earth. And to do this, we needed jihad for that, armed struggle. If we were to achieve kind of martyrdom, death, that would be the biggest honor. And they would back this up with several Quranic verses that says that Shaheed truly never dies. Or there are some verses that God has purchased from the believer their properties in their soul in exchange for paradise. They fight, and they're killed and they kill other people. So basically, when you're living in that environment, you're just an environment that's completely riddled with kind of poverty, constant sexual repressions, and you're just left at the mercy of your imagination. And then you think, if you can't have it here in this world, you might have it in the other world. The only things that remains between you, that other good life, is kind of just to get rid of yourself and then achieve the highest honor in Islam, which is the martyrdom. But in addition to that, you would often hear a lot of myths, abounded around kind of martyred everywhere in the refugee camps. There were stories, people were saying that the shaheed were kind of unburied after so many years. Their body were intact and they smelled of musk. And then somebody might say that a man's son was killed, attained martyrdom during the war. He rose from the dead and then just clasped his father's hands. Or maybe dog refused to eat Shahid's body, but they ate communist. So just living in that poor environment, I really fell for those myths. And we would also attend a lot of jihadi conferences and jalasas. There would be preachers, they would present the Western world as savage, cruel, and inhumane there, and then saying that everything bad happened in the Muslim world was infidels' plots there. And they would fit us a lot of conspiracy theory as well, and they would bring banners and pictures of demolished mosque in Lebanon, and decapitated children in Palestine, and also uh, kind of mainly distraction to portray, the Western world as a completely evil. And then you get a sense of anger as well. So this was my combination of my personality, that what I had gone through, during the Civil War, and then here I came there. I was really attracted to that new ideology. I found a sense of belonging in meaning as well, but then that darker side of that drove me into kind of really dark places. That was the reason in 1996 when the Taliban took over Kabul, and then I just went.
Okay, just to ask, how old were you at that time?
So when I went
About
there, when I migrated first time to the refugee camp, I was 14 years of age. By the time the Taliban took over Kabul, that was 1996. So within that span of a year and a half or 2 years, I was completely brainwashed, and my dire desire in life was, to become a martyr and participate in
so
jihad.
that was like as a child, did you have any other dreams?
So once I went there, my life was completely reduced to eating and sleeping Islam, and then thinking of, martyrdom and jihad. There was nothing else. I would wake up early in the morning and then perform my prayer, and then would read after prayer the Quran, and then I will do kind of sunrise prayer, Ishraq Salat, and then go to madrasas, and then from madrasa come have a bit of lunch, and then again go to Quran memorizations. So it just kind of, I saw everything through the lens of Islam's, and then I was saying this world is kind of mundane and trivial. Our real eternal life is in hereafter. I was even at that time entertaining the idea of kind of going to jihad to Bosnia, because a lot of people were going there. Because as I said earlier, when you're just living in such an environment that's completely riddled with poverty and constant sexual repressions, and usually when that afterlife is depicted to you as a place of absolute comfort filled with beautiful girls as well. So, and when you are a firm believer as well, and then you think, you have nothing in this life, you only need, to be brave enough, to get to that eternal and good life, and get rid of all this guilt and misery that you're carrying in this life with yourself. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned that the martyrs were kind of celebrated as heroes. Do you remember the first time you thought, I want to become one of these heroes?
Yeah, actually, there was a series of incidents. Basically, first, during the Civil War, we migrated for a short period to the countryside of Maidan Shar there. That was kind of rural Afghanistan. Now, as you know, the rural Afghanistan had been a war zone of anti-Soviet war zone for the past 10 years. So the scars and wounds of the anti-Soviet were present everywhere. There was a martyr cemetery there that contains the dead body of people who had been killed during, the anti-Soviet war. So whenever the villager walked past that cemetery, they would knock on a gravestone and then say "Shohada," it means martyr. Congratulations, Islam have become victorious. So I was finding it hilarious and very fascinating as well. And then there was an Arab grave as well there, and then villagers said that emitted lights at night. It was a miracle in their eyes. But one night when I was gazing from the rooftop of my kind of uncle, and then I did see some flickers of light. So those ideas really had already captured my imaginations. And then another time, me and my cousin, we were kind of bringing kind of sands, to kind of place it and pour it under animal feet to cut down the dust there. So we were cutting the kind of sands from a stream that were running along that cemetery. He said, God forbid us, what we are doing is in case it could hurt shuhadas, because in his eyes, they were just alive there. And then, but we carried on anyway. We brought sons, and at night I had a dream. I was in that cemetery, and then naked, and then those flags were really kind of hitting my faces, and I woke up in a state of fear. And then, when I kind of narrated this my dream to my cousin, he said he had a similar dream. That's why we took every ounce of that sands back, and then we poured it back. So from that on, that was I was about 14 years. At that time, I was about 13 years of age. Those ideas had captured my imagination. But then when I migrated to refugee camp in madrasa, they were backed up by Quranic verses and also a lot of mythologies as well. So it was a series of events, over time, and then I became a firm believer, that the shaheed, the martyr, would always remain alive. One day I was in the mosque there. An older man was invited by a mullah to narrate the miracle of his son's martyrdom. The old man went to the kind of minbar, the pulpit there, and then he was narrating the story that his son went to jihad, and they disappeared for 2 years. And then one day, Prophet Muhammad came to his dream, and then he told him his son's whereabouts. And then he went to Kunduz province, and he found his sons under the snow. And he was saying that his sons were smiling, and the fresh blood was gushing from the wounds there. And everyone cried there, and everyone just ran, to touch him. At that time, I bowed to God, and I said, "Whoa, that must be true." So
I
it's
mean,
just a event. So mythology, personality, and religious scriptures, all, it drives you. It kind of completely shut your rational faculty, and it puts you in some sort of religious psychosis that you see, things that are not real.
yeah, why did you join madrasas? Was there any recruitment process, any middleman? Like you were in the refugee camp, right? What
No,
happened? Why did you join madrasa?
yeah, actually, the madrasa, they were the only school available in those refugee camps. Basically, Sharia was in place there as well. So they were state within a state. We had this Amr bil Maruf, those people, promotion of virtue and prevention of voice squads, as the Taliban have. We used to call them Enzibat there. Yeah, the only school available were madrasa. Basically, the entire structures of those refugee camps were madrasas. To tell you about the
Okay.
madrasas, so it's
Just
just
just before just before you put the details, were there any other childrens with you? Like how many childrens were with you in the same class or
yeah.
madrasa?
So Yeah, well, when we were in a class there, I would say it were about 30 students or something like that. I don't exactly remember the exact number. I don't remember it. But many of them, that have showcased their kind of stories in this book, Delusions of Paradise, went on and carried out suicide bombing, and some of them are big Taliban members. It's just to tell you about this madrasa culture. I call it madrasa culture because prior to Soviet invasions in entire Afghanistan, there were only a couple of madrasas. And I've kind of said this in several places. Steve Cole, in his book, The Ghost Verses, prior to Soviet invasion, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, that's a contentious area between Afghanistan and Pakistan. There were about only 700 madrasas that taught only devotional matters. But then by the time when the Russians were leaving, it kind of mushroomed to about 35,000 madrasas. So basically, in madrasas, poor kids from Afghan villages, they get admission there, and then they graduate as an activist. They strive for kind of implementation of Sharia. They become Islamists. They want Islam, as a form of government, and they do jihad for that, or they open their own madrasas, or they become mullahs in the mosque. They kind of fit those extreme ideology that they learn in those madrasas to general publics. So that's why when I say the Taliban that we have now today is the continuation of that culture. Had it not been for certain event, I could have been one of them, because at that time, I think, when looking back on myself, I was like a blind sheep that anyone could kind of lead me to a slaughterhouse. And I was green and naive, and then I fell for a lot of myths.
Yeah. Just you were just a child. Did anybody tell you that you are still a child and you're too young to be a jihadist, for example?
No, no, that's what I have said in my book. Instead of teaching us how to live, they were teaching us how to die. Because when kind of to the extent that Jannah or maybe heaven is glorified, and then they would tell us a shaheed with the first drop of the blood, all your sin will be forgiven and you will be given the best place in paradise. So there was no such thing as that. Our only kind of life depended on Islam, and then our eternal abode, which we thought at that time it was just akhirah, it means like the other life.
Okay, I also want to know about the system. Like, you're in a refugee camp and studying in a madrasa. How did you move from studying in a madrasa toward like becoming involved with the Taliban?
Okay, basically, so to me, the Taliban's are an ideology. So it's the main motivator is this ideology. Even before the Taliban took over Kabul, so we were a lot of our mullahs in madrasa trumpeting their, glorifications because they were unhappy with the performance of Mujahideen. They were saying that they kind of messed up with the results of jihad. So as soon as they took Kabul, we were celebrating it, and then like many others, from the refugee camps, and I just traveled to Kabul, and then my cousin in Maidan, they were already fighting for the Taliban. They were controlling Turan and Manal's garrisons. So there, and then they gave me a gun, and then they kind of taught me how to kind of shoot. And at that time, my desire, for jihad was so strong in martyrdom that I wanted to be deployed to the north, and but then he said that he didn't have my father permissions. I stayed over a month there, and then my father came and tracked me down back from the refugee camps, and then he had a quarrel with my cousin. So I didn't want to escalate their quarrel, and then I went along with my father. But again, when I went to the refugee camp, I had this burning desire, to participate in jihad and be martyred. And then I fled home to join Haqqani Madrasa, which is one of the Taliban's biggest endorsers. So it's just away from
Yeah,
the
it's
refugee.
like it it has been famously known as the University of Jihad. Like,
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Pers-
why did you want to go there?
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, that's because it was known for as a university of jihad. But the good thing about at that time, and I thought not now, because about that madrasa where they were sending their students, in summer, to fight along the Taliban's do jihad. And also, and then a lot of prominent Taliban member had graduated from there. And then I wanted to be kind of a proper Islamic scholar. And in the meantime, I had this desire. I thought, once I get there, then my father cannot have his hands in. Then I could easily, go in the summer and join jihad, or I could, because at that time I had this notion that we were not only concerned with Afghanistan, that we were going to re-erect Islamic Khilafat back, Caliphate back, and then we would capture Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Islam would dominate the entire world. So for that reason, and I went there, but then admission were closed for that year, and then I put my name for the next year. But then again, I fled in 1997. I fled home because this time I said, no matter what, I'm going to go to Maidan, and then I wouldn't even involve my cousin. I will just kind of join a battalion directly to Nuri, who was the governor of the Maidan at that time. But en route, when I was going back, a lot of incident took place that really kind of changed my mindset toward the Taliban. The car was stopped at the outskirts of Jalalabad once, and then we prayed, and then the car traveled a few miles down the road, and another group of the Taliban just kind of stopped us against. They were forcing us to do the noon prayer. But at that time, I acted a bit cocky, and I said that was not the way they were preaching Islam, and because we had already prayed, the noon prayer, and then they were not believing everyone. And then he said if I didn't shut my mouth, he was going to bury 30 bullets in my stomach. I mean, like that didn't resonate well with me. And then again, when I went to Kabul with one of my cousin, I went and watched the execution ceremony where two thieves were brought. They chopped their hands. Again, I closed my eyes and just really put me off. And then the next the man was given a gun, to kill his brother, murderer. Again, that was by nature. I think I consider myself more of an empathic person. I didn't like it. And then when I was traveling back from Kabul to Maidan Shar, my hat was blown away by the winds once I got down from the bus, and a group of them came there. They were just kind of harassing me and telling me that why I was not wearing my hat because I was imitating infidel, and they were getting me to the village square to cut my hair, and then also lash me. So they were basically looking for a drama, and despite I was begging them. But then as soon as they realized that I had connection with my cousins, they left me alone. And then again, at that time, I heard,
Okay, so
rumors.
your cousin was a Taliban member, right?
Yeah, 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 he's
Okay.
Taliban.
Yeah.
Because, Toran Amanullah, he was a Hizbi Islami commander. Once he left there, and then my cousin took over his garrison. My cousin had already they had studied in madrasas there. So they were ideologically really tuned with that narrative of the Taliban. So they were the head, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. At
you
the
have
same
all
time, yeah, sorry, yeah, go ahead, yeah.
yeah, you have also mentioned that studying in madrasas, in the madrasa you were kind of ready to die for the Taliban cause.
Mhm.
It's pretty strong. Like, how could a child become so radicalized? Could you please tell us more
Ye-
about it?
So, as I said before, it's just a combination of personality, the environment, and the religious scriptures. Okay, you basically, as I said earlier, when you walk into madrasa, you're just walking into an ideological echo chambers of the past. Because you live there with bygone stories of the prophets and his companion and how bravely they fight. And in the meantime, they would just lionize, the martyr, and then depict their afterlife with absolute comfort. And they would back this up with several Quranic verses and also hadiths as well, because we have numerous verses that says, وَلَا تَقُولُوا لِمَنْ يُقْتَلُ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ وَلَكِنْ لَا تَشْعُرُونَ. do not consider those who die in the cause of Allah, as dead. They stay alive, and then because we don't understand them. Or another place we say, God, إن الله اشترى من المؤمنين أنفسهم وأموالهم بأن لهم الجنة. God has purchased from the believer their properties and their soul because in exchange for paradise. And then they say they fight in the cause of Allah, they are killed and they kill other people. And then they would back this up. The biggest honor in Islam was martyrdom. And then with the first drop of your blood, all your sin will be forgiven. And as much as that, and they would just bring a lot of mythology around it, how that Shaheed could survive there. And have, so many people. And they would just bring up, a lot of hadith that also says that how the bodies of Shaheed remains intact. So over time, it's just slowly, it's indoctrination. You enter that religious psychosis, your mindsets, really get fixated into that past there. And then your rational faculty completely loses its ability. And then you see that lie, as your ultimate reality. And then again, because as I said earlier, when you're just living in an environment that's just completely riddled with poverty, no woman, no foods there, and then you have those beautiful virgins, in the heaven, and then you have all the foods and all comforts there. So what you're left at the mercy of your own imaginations there. You say, okay, if I can't have it, then I will have it. I could have it, somewhere else there. So it's just all the combination of those factors there. It's not an easy. I'm not saying everyone would go to that extent, but when I look at back on that young man myself, the false narrative, delusions he took us through, I feel sorry for the boy that I was, and I shudder with fear for today's generation of young men and women who are once again living, under the Taliban regime, and they're being brainwashed into those destructive ideologies of Islamism, jihadism, and martyrdom. And as you know, probably as well, that's just a tragedy. As of now, I've heard in some report that 9 million kids are attending madrasas. Basically, they are potential Islamists because they would want Sharia. And to establish Sharia, they would do jihad there. And during the jihad, if they were to attain martyrdom, that would be their highest honor. So I mean, it's really hard there, because from the outsider they don't understand it, but you're just living in that constant environment. You're bombarded with every day with the same hadith, with bygone stories of the past there, and then you see that as reality. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not all. You have mentioned like many turning points in your life. One is joining a secular school in Peshawar. Like,
Yeah.
how that changed you? Could you please tell us more? What was your biggest shock when you joined the secular
Yeah.
school?
It's a really gradual process. That's a really good question. So, in 1997, as I said there, the Taliban were kind of trying to cut my hair. And then at that time, I heard some stories as well that the Taliban were backed up by Pakistan. So some doubt developed inside me. I thought, if I were to achieve martyrdom in their cause, would I be considered a pure martyr? Because the Taliban at that time were not fighting pure infidels. So when I came back, I was still waiting for the Haqqaniya Madrasa for the next year. In our day madrasa, Imam Azam Madrasa shut its door there. And in the meantime, my father was hounding me to do something with my life there, okay? But that time, our economy got a little bit better as well there. I could manage, to travel to Peshawar. And then I got admission just to shut my father, in a kind of more of a secular IRC school there. But that was a different environment. The students were there. They hadn't been brought up around the stories of martyrdom and jihad, unlike the kids, in the refugee camp. They were from Kabul. They were shaving their beards and they were just kind of watching Indian movies. So they have a quite different perspective on life as well. And then in the meantime, I began reading, outside of jihad. So I came out of that closet, that mindset, that kind of that secluded mindset. And then once I began reading outside of jihad, the questions began popping in my head. And then there were so many other things that I studied that they were contradicting Quran as well. For example, in biology, we studied that semen was kind of produced in the testes, but I had learned in the Quran that it was kind of produced between backbone and ribs, which was really contradicting Quran. And also, Quran was giving geocentric view, but while we thought, that it was more of heliocentric, like kind of the Earth was revolving around the sun. And one of my friends who used to study there, one of my classmates, he told me that his sister was in Germany and she was pregnant and they already knew, the gender of the child there. I couldn't believe it because I had studied, in the Quran that only God knew that. So again, those questions were really kind of challenging my mindsets. When the next year came, I got used to those boys there. I didn't even bother to go to Haqqaniya Madrasa. So as environment change, friendship change, and I do consider myself a little bit of this critical thinker. And then I was able, to question a lot of things. That's where I wrote this book because I had been brainwashed and I had been kind of radicalized there, and I was fortunate enough, to get out of that mindset. Now I want to kind of expose that systems, that leads people to commit such heinous acts, or even to entertain the imagination of those heinous acts, because it starts from imagination, from the ideology that leads to actions.
Yeah. Did you lose any friends when you change your mind? Like, tell me about some of your friends who probably remained with the Taliban.
Yeah, some of them whom I had depicted their stories in this book. One of the lad, he had kind of this feminine, girly feature as well, and he was really kind of people looked down upon him a little bit, and because he was a little bit different, but he was very pious in the meantime as well. I saw him prior to kind of the September 11 attack, and he went to Kashmir there for some training. And then I heard in 2008 he kind of carried out a suicide mission in Kabul. And then another friend who was from actually from Maidanshar village, he used to kind of lead prayer and in Maidania's mosque. It's just in Shamshatu. He went on to become a suicide bombing trainer in Waziristan before he was killed in his son, in a drone strike. And some of the Taliban members, as I mentioned, Ghulam Ghaus and others, are still in the Taliban. They're high-ranking officials. But then again, from that refugee camps, like hundreds of boys went on, and then they carried out those suicide attacks. Even a girl in September 2012 carried out that. So as you can see there, that's why I wrote this book. Because had it not been for certain event, I could have been one of them because I had that mindset. I had the same desire at one time. What happened, that I broke away from that mindset?
So, if you could go back to the camp now, what would you say to the 14 years old boy today? Like,
Yeah, that's
if
a
you could
really
go
good
back.
question. Yeah, to be honest, I will just tell them, look, I was naive and I was green, and I bought a bunch of lies and myths. I mean, life is totally different from what we were taught in madrasas. And I will just easily tell them that no matter what, everybody who dies, their body rots and decays. And I'm now in a medical field. I understand it. It's just completely baseless that Shahid would remain alive forever. And then also, I would just tell them, if you have a God and he's powerful enough, why would he need you to wage jihad on his behalf there? He could protect his own religion. Yes, there are injustices in the world. Yes, people are suffering as well, but violence is not the way. It's more of pragmatism, it's more of critical thinking, diplomacy, and education, scientific educations. So basically, yeah, I'll just tell them that I kind of I bought a lot of bunch of lies, and there were lies there, and then you don't want to be kind of believing in on a bunch of lies, and then not to be following the herd mentality. Uh, Make your own meaning, and then most of the mullahs behind that is just politics. The religion is being instrumentalized, for political purposes. But within the religion in itself, it has that potential, and that potential is based on false narrative and lies.
Okay, just the last question. You mentioned that as a child, maybe your dream was to die for the cause of Islam. But today, as a man, your profession is like helping people to heal, helping people heal. How do you understand your own transformation?
Yeah, that's why in this book I have detailed my journey, from somebody who wanted to be a martyr for Islam to becoming kind uh, of a physiotherapist and also an advocate for critical thinking. And it shed light on how young people are indoctrinated into those destructive ideology. So as much as I tell my story in this book, I also, show reader the larger geopolitical landscape that pushed Afghanistan into hands of Islamism. So basically, when I look back from this angle, I have a different mindset, and I want to prevent error. I want to just rather than make people better. And then at the same time, I think that mindset is really important. So we have to kind of, if we don't tackle that ideology, and it's really difficult because a lot of people ignore the ideology, they blame people. I see, a lot of the Taliban, a lot of the lads who carried on, he went on to carry out those suicide bombing. They were not inherently evil people, but they were just kind of under influence of that ideology. They were just victim of that ideology. So to me, I think I see this as my responsibility to prevent other, from falling in the same trap that I had fallen once there. We don't want, other, might want to go on then desire, in life to be a martyr. Rather, they would be kind of scientists, athletes, or life is beautiful and then it's short to make best use of it. That would be my advice. Yeah.
Okay, fascinating. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
To